Shall we talk about protest powers? Because a new announcement from the Home Secretary today that is like another further crackdown on protesting. What is it?
So James Cleverly is exploring the idea of giving police further powers to crack down on protests. So this would include the ability to arrest protesters that climb on statues and monuments during protests, and also arrest people wearing face coverings. And this obviously all comes in light of the pro-Palestine protests that we've seen for a good few months now. Obviously, Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, and now the current Home Secretary, James Cleverly, both taking a very firm stance on this and saying that lots of them really just exploit some of the rules that they'd like to see in power. So what James Cleverly is suggesting is just giving the police stronger powers to clamp down on this. Obviously, there is a bit of criticism, obviously people do have the free right to protest and you don't really want to intervene on that. So there'll be some questions about how hard you go with it.
OK, well, let's bring in Victor Alisa, who's a former senior police officer. Good morning, Victor. You've obviously studied what these new proposals are. Would you support making it illegal to climb on things?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for inviting me onto the programme. Absolutely, yes, unquestionably, because if you look at the comments from the Home Secretary, the comments from the National Police Chiefs Council and senior police officers, a small minority of people who protest break away from the majority of protesters to carry out these activities which are illegal, which are disrespectful, and which at the moment...
Hang on a minute, are they disrespectful or are they illegal? I mean, that's where you've sort of got to put this dividing line, haven't you? Is climbing on things isn't necessarily illegal, but it is incredibly disrespectful. Do you turn that disrespect into a criminal offence?
Well, I think that's what the government's trying to do, to give the police the powers to be able to actually remove people doing these things. So there is a fine line between illegality and disrespect, but what that then does is actually the majority of people who want to protest, the point they're trying to make is lost because a small minority is actually creating disruption which detracts from the legitimate process. And I think that's important. We're in a democracy. If people want to protest and want to do so peacefully, then they should have the right to be able to do so. And the police should be able to actually make sure they can do so safely.
What about the face covering issue? Because that's an altogether knottier area. And you do find that if you give the police power to do one thing, it's not long before they're either overreaching or they're using it in the wrong context.
That's always a risk, and that's a risk that's been borne out through history. And interestingly enough, the face covering was an amendment to the Stop and Search Act, which actually prevented people or police officers to ask people who were in the place to commit an offence to remove face covering. But police officers didn't have the power to do anything more other than ask them to remove it. But they could actually then formulate powers of arrest, of detention, if they actually had evidence to suspect they were going to commit a criminal offence. But this now addition to the legislation gives police that specific power to ask people to remove face coverings. If they don't remove face coverings, there's a power of arrest, and then there's a sanction of the fine of £1,000. So I think it definitely plugs a loophole and will make it easier for police officers to be able to deal with people who go to protest to be disruptive.
I guess in some senses, a protest has to be disruptive to be effective.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think you can go into a protest and you can cause some inconvenience. And I think that's the whole nature of protesting. If you have large groups of people actually walking down the road peacefully and then vehicles can't move and people can't get to where they want to go, I think that's acceptable. But I think when you get small numbers, and the Home Office have said this, and senior police have said this, small numbers of people who deliberately want to cause damage, who deliberately want to detract from the peaceful protest, I think it's only right that we should be able to actually allow the majority to make their point, but stop the minority causing damage, which they have done at some occasion, but to give the police the powers to be able to do that. Now, there's one thing, giving the police the powers to be able to actually deal with these minority in the majority, but the practical aspects of that are not going to be easy. If you have a large group of people who are peacefully protesting, you've got a small group who want to disrupt, the police have to find a way of getting into that large group to arrest, to remove face masks, to give them fixed penalty notices if there's no power of arrest. That's hugely resource intensive. So the powers are great, but I think we have to wait and see what it's like in practice at demonstrations, see how effective those powers can be used to meet the government's wishes to actually stop the small minority of people who are causing disruption at demonstrations and processions, as is described in the addition to the legislation.